Oh, that comes on the Luciana. Oh, that means you got on some soon, I said. Oh, that's someone, and it's Southern Zone, and it's someone and a Southern Conche, and it's someone running this. The name is on the Tome, someone's on Boji, and he's also in my other. Or meeting check with this, or do something or this, yeah.
The Bhaskara Dampa masters have said that when the intention is good, then the bhumis and the paths will be good. And when the intention is bad, then the stages and the paths will be bad. Everything depends on the motivation. And so therefore, it would be good if we would cultivate a good intention, and that we would try to make an effort in cultivating a good intention. That's all.
Well, then it's a tate, someone's on what you did, what it is soon, well, yeah. What Jay says, there's some dog, I think, I'm also wrong means, and that's some Chibaris, and I do what Chiboji do, they was Yapol Gawaya. Any day don't should do anything or Gawaya, whatever. The name is a Tangone, the need they were Chibol Gawaya, and I thought they she told no, this was a somba sense on my goodness. Sense on my yana, then Karishan and Donna Dana. Come, somba on my yana, then Donna Dana, Karishan or Carlos Savian, Karishan, Nina, Sincher, Chuboyarwa. Any day don't show somba, Yabo Yimana, any day don't show the Chigaris, the name is a time. Somba on my jera de Mandota, Chi, Nionage, Machang is one of girls. And the music change when I change yes or not, and there is just some other music. All the thought girl or this or to sing.
And so the advice is that we need to cultivate a good motivation. And so we human beings are really the same. We all want to experience happiness. We want for good things to happen to us. And we do not desire to encounter the opposite. Nobody wants to suffer. We don't want to suffer. And for this reason, if we want to be happy, most importantly, that depends on our motivation, our good motivation. If you have a good motivation, then whatever you do, you will experience happiness, whether you're walking around or you're sitting, sleeping, eating, whatever you do, you will be happy. But on the other hand, if you have a negative intention, then the opposite will happen. No matter what you do, you will experience suffering. So even if for someone who does not practice the Dharma, for this reason, a good motivation is very important. And in particular, for those of us who do practice the Dharma, it is really necessary. That's all.
What the needs are done, what the need, then may say, Tangan the Chino and Chiawa Monte, so no Chino and Chimagina, and the Tele to some bottom of the river. Oh, no, oh, no Chino sooner, Chichitawa. Chichitawa, some bottom means, or two cheese on the rock. And the day chairman, Tangan no Chiman, Chili Jamba, or Yishido, Kashido, Tomega, that's some bottom of the race and Chipala sooner. Chili Tomega, Ronando. Oh, then the Yen, they were then the Shomba, the winter, Niji, and the Zeba. Oh, when your nature goes, say, Tango, oh, no cheat tempe, that Chili Tomega, like a Chijiro. The Jaga guard says, and on the Lord, Saint Tender, like the Yard. Yet, Saint and the Shi one job, they were young in a wall, and a creature showed that some was on Gary said, what the listen about, what the names are then under Moishiba Chem, some man, Tanya Marina, some was on Boy, one of that, so, or Tashisha, what they say,
So even those who are not practitioners of the Dharma need to have a good motivation. And especially as practitioners of the Buddha Dharma, we need a good motivation. Since it is necessary in any religion, especially in the Buddhist tradition, it is necessary because in the teachings it is said that the root of the Dharma is a good intention. And there are different religions, even if it's not Buddhism, for example, even those who practice Christianity or Islam, they all speak about the importance of a good motivation. And in particular, in the Dharma, we are being given the advice that if we desire happiness, we need a good motivation. And so that good motivation consists of those three parts. It is love that wishes for the happiness of others, and compassion that wishes for others to be free from suffering, and then patience. So that is really a kind of a general instruction that we receive as a Buddhist practitioner. And these words of advice were given to us for the benefit of all sentient beings. So really the most important cause for achieving happiness is a good motivation. It's important to recognize that and to make an effort each and every day to cultivate such a good motivation. That's all.
아니 뭐뭐 마셔야지 다 야보한테 비타보 내가 가시엔시야 대우시가 말이지 대시야나 용 야보한테는 수 소소 가와지 수 가와지 농가나 시야와 어떻게 제일 마셔요 알겠어 다 되니까 다 되네 다 되와 저런선 연애 제일 되와 팬도 이해하지 어디 숨이지 다 대가가서 다 개체수 소모좀 거리스 처음에 너 아니 쉬는熊주지 생 어디니지지 어디면은 다熊把你 이제지 공다주지 정말 소모좀 뭐지 아니 대체는 들이 내가도 다들 정말 내와 요아리스 내년에 제대로 뭐뭐매와 팬도야 어디니 손도가 어디니 인자데 다리 공연한 거 뭐뭐라 임바 어떤 저 정말 치바지 다 남도 정말 쇼게네 얘네 이거는 그런 정보 있지 영화한테도 그 선바 정보지 그타야가 아니 지야나 다시 지야나 아니 야고요 그래서 어두 세나 야고요 야
Chowo Atisha, when he taught the Dharma, he said that I will not teach you a lot of Dharma teachings, because if I teach you so much, you won't be able to practice it. It would be too much to practice. So I will give you a concise Dharma teaching that is of great benefit, a real quality, simple Dharma teaching that you can practice, that is easy to practice and bears a lot of benefits. So what is this most important essential practice? He said it is a good motivation, a mind of bodhicitta, a mind of love and compassion. So he said that you should all cultivate such a mind of bodhicitta. If you do so, you will achieve temporary and ultimate happiness. So it is a practice that does not require a lot of different teachings. You can practice it quite easily, and it is very beneficial. And so this really is the same thing that we had mentioned before. When you get up in the morning, have a good motivation. Get up with a good motivation, thinking that today I'm going to do my best to have a good intention, a good motivation. So.
어떻게 시동체는 당한도 노와세체 상지 총마 가리 침모로와 레데 당 메세데 당한도 다이 공디셔 라마 조지 베게 만도 가리 침모레리 와리스 안데세 가리 침모세 당한도 단다 디넨도 뭐시나 몽초로와 이나 단당한도 조지 물론 통보에 자는 나도 배를 배 고소 배를 배가 돼 그런 지도만 샤지 저는 시동은 로알 펜도 모두스 가와데 아니네 배를 배 대치하나 펜도 전부도 덴번 로알 텐디스 지도로는 송로와 될라 되네 저기 배를 배 텐디 chen 당한도라 저기 배를 배네 당한도 수시 모모노 다 장로 써야 돼 모모를 대행에는 가서 시야 배 근데 내리 시야는 농바리 내리 시야는 농바 말이 생겨체 시야로 대 타치디 세워 싫어요 말 그래서 대행자 저기 배는 당도 세워 지송 아니 대 저기 배는 배샤熊去老人早晚的大老人些了，别像女些点这了，点了点呢，他点早晚前呢，他这里从你看到老么人别吃，忙忙的话，但老的钱不真正去，老人别像忙忙的话，那种长忙的早晚的我得就几个，重要的点早晚前呢，老人些了，点钱呢用的话。这里现在等你们这里说你们的老用的，老用目前的，但我们就把这边的草嘛，偏土不那个，等着草嘛早晚的都现在就几个得说呢，等你们学的是，等你这样的没些家里全部的是呀，
So, in generally speaking, all the Buddhas have been very kind to us sentient beings. And in particular, actually, Lord Atisha has been very kind to us. And so how has he been very kind to us? It is because of what he said. He will not give a lot of complicated teachings. Instead, he will give concise teachings to really simplify it. And so actually when Atisha came to Tibet, he was already quite elderly. And it happened because he first had a vision of Tara. And so he asked Tara, which place should I go to bring about the greatest benefit? And she said that if you would go to Tibet, it would bring a lot of benefit to the Buddha's teachings and to sentient beings. And so he went to Tibet. And so he came to Tibet really to clarify the Buddha's teachings. Because during that time in Tibet, there were many different teachings. Now we have different teachings like the refuge and so on. But during this time, it was not so clear actually what actually constitutes a real authentic Buddhist practice and what is actually not really a Buddhist practice. So that was not so clear at the time. So Atisha came to Tibet to clarify the points on the teachings, and so therefore his teachings, which was the graduated path, the Lamrim, and really became the basis for the teachings. So there is a very short text on the Lamrim, the lamp to enlightenment, is it the Lodrin? And so it's a very short Lamrim text. There's many different Lamrim texts nowadays. So there's longer, medium length one, concise ones. There's many different ones. But then the root of all these Lamrim teachings was taught by Lord Atisha. And so, for example, we have received this advice on how to engage in Dharma practice in a simple way, such as when we get up in the morning and so on. And so these teachings are concise, yet inclusive, all complete, and extremely beneficial. And so that is the reason why he is particularly kind to us. So.
Jiangzhou 过给清波前的当年我们送的是，你这他教就开始说，当俺们的农巴嘛的些厂了一样了哇，我得搞完这个是得江州过的这个了是，我跟你说我说，那些农学挖农巴的，厂了我的，我江州过的这个的是， 마도 장로면 다른도 뒤로 개방 체 그러러와 안에 다 대송네 정보 나보도 다세보도 되게 자용 말이 그래서 다들 장로고는 제거리 생 어디니 무슨 말이스 어디니 자데니 되는 주데 신농시와 장리관의 송로와 원창로 어디니 창매가 세워 쳐리스 되니 자 쇼지 되니 무슨 여 자데니 예서 와제 동가배로 당연도 조지 시와도 노와 치와데 장로고는 야상도 대하래 만도 마서는 인지게마 난세 야보래도 스텝에 야본도 세 마제 치아로와 되니 자다데 만도 로다노 지도 순자리스 대인가 저는 뭔지야 하고 그리대야 저는 내서 하고나 야보여로 어두선다야.
So when Atisha came to Tibet, he gave teachings on refuge. Actually, his first teachings were teachings on refuge, because that was a very important point for him to clarify, especially when it came to answering that question, what really constitutes a Buddhist practice and what is not considered to be Buddhist. And he said that really the decisive kind of point of what really makes the difference between Buddhist or not Buddhist is the refuge. So that really discerns a Buddhist from a non-Buddhist, whether or not they have taken refuge. And so the refuge, a Buddhist is not someone is not determined by the way they look, like they're like you have like black hair or blonde hair and so on. That doesn't matter. It's whether or not one has taken refuge. And so that became then very clear to the people there. And then also later, Geshe Langri followed with a similar advice as Atisha. And he said that he also said that the difference between Buddhist and non-Buddhist is the refuge. And that really clarified things to a great extent. So it's actually very important to know that. And so most of you are aware of that, and it's really important to know that.
Jenny Gare Sen, a modern Sheton Soso, Sheton Quair Dume, Mombo San, or Quair Dume to the song. Only in music, Tang Soson, Yawai Dotano, Dume to Mombo San, or Del Giana, Yapon Nesosan Shen, Soso, Shinona, Gitana, J, Saint Dinkro. 我也我切得去切，俺你他得了小呗，新农切得那朋友嘛的话，我得了，他一些个我是得了他那个老板呢，小呢，这呢，俺呢上去去跟的，我得上来都是，但是他得了，得了这大老牛，得了加上多呢，得了些个的是，得了他讲到今年的话，今年不得说最近。 那次的也呢，俺的工作机了，讲到也不懂，俺的对面呢，俺的工作机了，讲到没有，我听的人多，我听的这个，我的今年没得呀，但今年看也跟我咱们几年了，几年了，俺这个样嘛，今年的匆匆了，这工作机了，俺讲到有的意思，俺在弄把的意思，我当然都他解决了，我都是有的意思呀。
So the difference between Buddhist and non-Buddhist is the refuge. And so since this is kind of the dividing line of that which determines it, so what do we then need in order to have refuge? It is said that refuge possesses two causes. The first one is that we reflect and we recognize the great suffering of samsara, in particular, the suffering in the three lower realms of the hell beings, the hungry spirits, and the animals. And we reflect that if I'm born there, that is a great suffering. I don't want to be born there. And so you develop fear of the suffering of samsara, really from deep within your mind. So that's the first cause. But then this fear alone is not beneficial. What you also need is something that then helps you, assists you with that fear. And that is the refuge. So that is why we go for refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha. And that is the second cause. And so if we have these two causes, then we can say we have refuge. If we do not have refuge. And we need both of these causes. It's not enough to have only one of them. If one of them is missing, it is not sufficient. So we need both. And if we have both, then we can say with confidence, I have refuge. I'm a Buddhist practitioner. So.
我这次到的我现在让你弄把桥了，那你江州更多，江州让你也好了，江州一年没得更多，对，这次江州一年没得说弄弄等于钱了，那你江州也得哇，对呀那，说是弄白这，对吧？来弄个哇，得说弄白这的成了个，对，对的一年没得买了，我们现在个桥要求桥弄把起山了，绕个的山了，得弄把。快喇叭装的嘛，我瞧一样嘛的嘛。我这张那弄把弄把今年装的，弄把来我的说他，当然今年我的充了钱，说就是讲着也花钱了，那你得那搞等级弄把瞧的，他我都承担，我得给请我让记住啊，呀
So again, to put it into simple terms, in order to become a Buddhist, we need to have refuge. And in order to have refuge, we need to possess these two causes. So if we reflect or we develop these causes in our mind streams, then we will actually be brought into the community of Buddhists, and we actually become a Buddhist. And if we do not have these two causes, we are not a Buddhist. Even if somebody else tells us, even if somebody else takes us in and tells us, now you're Buddhist, that these are just words. That does not necessarily make us an actual Buddhist. In order to become a Buddhist, we need to have refuge, and to have refuge, we need to have these two causes. And if we have that, then we have a stable support of refuge. And so therefore, this is very important. So.
我这次当然这样，弄把钱啊，因把装嘛这，当弄的台湾去年，台湾全部我去年来去了，台湾全部结婚生年了吧？我对我大是台湾全部去，我结婚上，大是台湾全部巧个嘛了，台湾全部工作的话了，生些的，我说。台湾前面这么做的，我让你记得，这些的也没得，等于这个话的是，等于这他，这些的说出去来呢，那容易台湾前面全部了的话，这是东北年那过去了，得给全部记得是样。
And so now, then we become a Buddhist practitioner, but not only are we a Buddhist practitioner, many also say I'm a Mahayana practitioner. But of course, just saying I'm a Mahayana practitioner does not necessarily make us Mahayana. So that saying that alone will also be of no benefit. So there are again criteria that make one become a Mahayana practitioner. And if we possess this Mahayana state of mind, then we actually are brought into the community of Mahayana practitioners in actuality. And that really is that mind then that makes us a Mahayana practitioner. So that's also important to understand.
되시 다나 세시 소수지를 해봐라 가르세는 동거 세는 다 농가도 좀 생긴 뭐뭐야로 던져 처음다 동해나리 생지 던져 처음다 대화 용화지 동해 세화지 응애로 봐지 전도 체지 제거도 뭐 거래도 단나가 티니 빠데 문도 다티니 빠데 소리야잖아 다어 내가다 상지지 공부 타나 아니 게 니바든 누가스 근데 이따 체드셔 동해나리 생지 던져 처음에 다 펜데 펜바도 대화들이 된다네 내가 농지 상지지 공부지 타바 제거도 단단한 니빠문도 되니 제거도 선 아니 진영에 제 그리고 아니 되니 상지 공부 타바라 다시 나도 농지 시에부상이라고 시에부 중인데 시에부상이 농지도 맞던 년에 제랑 다시니 아니 상지 공부 타바 제기 선데 다 되는 세시에 되는 거 제가 원인도가 되니 거스 되니야나 다고 라니 공자데 대화 첨부 세 대처로 고소 당기 장도도 집하지 대야나 대화 첨부 라니 공자 대화 첨부 전래로 대 세노 동아데 노지 개첨부도 했어요.
And so what is this Mahayana state of mind that we have to cultivate, this mind generation? So it is to consider all sentient beings limitless as space. There are many sentient beings and they all experience great suffering. So to cultivate a Mahayana state of mind, we think that I want to bring happiness to all those sentient beings and I want to free them all from suffering. However, I do not have the ability, the power to do so at this point. So how can I gain this ability? When I attain the state of enlightenment, when I become a Buddha, then I will have the ability to benefit all sentient beings. So in order to bring happiness and benefit to all sentient beings, I will practice so that I attain enlightenment. And so I develop the ability to benefit sentient beings. So this is the intention for my Dharma practice. And there are three kinds of individuals, those with higher, those with middling, and those with inferior, lower mental capacities, according to the various stages of the path. So we need to develop the highest capacity, the highest state of mind, thinking that I will attain enlightenment for all sentient beings. So I want to liberate sentient beings and I want to attain enlightenment. So again, therefore the mind generation also consists of what precedes the mind generation is also two causes, just like during the refuge. And a person who possesses these causes can then call themselves a Mahayana practitioner. And so therefore it's important to also reflect on that.
대시 다른도 다 대화 시에잖아. 다른이 넘바 제사나 넘바를 주베 고나오데 장조래도가. 아니 넘베 노는 대화 침비 강도 제사나 아니 대화 침보 대신 주고나오데 세시에도가. 어때? 세워 쳐와지. 어디지잖아. 아니 야보여 할수다고. 난도 어디지잖아. 다스고 좀 동문태야 되리 소소 제마타와이 만두가 소노 동문동로 소소 생다 소노 동 공매제 제마체로 어디니 자도 쳐요 알겠어요.
So I'm going to put it in simple terms now. If one wants to be a Buddhist, the entrance door, the entrance gate to Buddhism is a refuge. And if one wants to practice the Mahayana, the entrance door to the Mahayana is the mind generation of bodhicitta. So this should make it very clear. And if you really think about it, that's something that one can do. This is not something that's impossible to accomplish because it's something to reflect on, and we can reflect on it. We can certainly think about this. It just depends on ourselves whether or not we make the effort to reflect on this. Yes.
Olama ju, o songres kasena, ande nyone che chi de non chi imba do. Ane de non chi de tewa chi mi chi imba zangji de de mare. Rani gongza rani ane te nomba imba do. Gongza rani tewa chi mi gongza imba che go des. Ro. Chi nyone che do tewa chi mi chi do. Non chi nyone che chi de yin nang penga mare ko. Gongza de nyone sa ne gongza rani ane nomba do tewa chi mo imba de. So che go de. O de sun ya ro. O de sun wa ta de ngan do so no to na de wa ya bo ya de se. O de se no to de ma de ne de ya ma re wa. Ya.
The masters, the lamas of the past have said that the dharma that we practice is the Buddha Dharma, and within that we practice the Mahayana. But it's not enough to just for the dharma to be the Mahayana. What must become the Mahayana is the person, the individual. So the individual, the person has to be a Buddhist, and it's the person who has to be a Mahayana practitioner. So meaning that oneself has to actually do it. We have to practice it. And that is why it's important to contemplate this. And it is something that we can reflect upon. And so it's not enough to just call something a Mahayana without practicing it. So.
Kasi nomba che song na dange jangdo ke ji xie yin ba wa de che ane de le o yin ba de ta nomba o jie song ye na so so nong ji song no dong tang de lu xie na de ye tong xie de ba de ye tong xie ta o ni bo de ye tong xie mo da ba li song de song no ji ye a che de ye tong xie mo de mo da ane sa che tong xie lu nga wa sa che sa ba nian mo li nian mo do de ne我嘛，他那那留言伊么怎么都上上你把带上，是吧？俺那什么的去东西到没？去干到去了的哦，让伊这边到没的什么的，俺那些话的他2年的些话是吧？当我那掏入钱东西，去那种掏入钱了，他等等的话，我那得把的当考完了，扬州嘛那么不的上。我天天想了咯，我天天想了那个一三东方的话，我天天想了也玩意了，那讲啥的，那弄起牛来吃，弄巴都，我天天给这些呢，也不要的是的，那个也没怎么的啊，当做弄起想了多了，也不要的，他这家全部想了多了，没要的吧，大地路想了多了，我都是的，他讲大就那个也没怎么的啊，我都是的，是呀。
So whether or not we do practice Buddhism is of course up to ourselves. It's our choice. And if we choose to practice the Buddha Dharma, then as we said, there are certain causes that need to be met for one to become a practitioner. So there's actually also 4 more reflections that serve as a cause of really becoming a Buddhist practitioner then, once we have the refuge. And so in terms of refuge, we think of it as we mentioned before. And then those 4 reflections that make one a practitioner are, number 1, we reflect that all compounded phenomena are impermanent. That's the first reflection. The second one is every thing contaminated or defiled is suffering. So what is contaminated really are our afflictive emotions. And if we are unable to give them up, we will only experience suffering. So that's number 2. Number 3 is that all phenomena are empty and selfless. No phenomenon possesses any self-nature and an inherent existence. All phenomena are empty and selfless. And then number 4 is nirvana, is peace. Nirvana is the state of liberation. The state of liberation is the state of true and lasting happiness. And until that is achieved, we will always go up and down in samsara. So that is those 4 reflections that we have to think about. And if we reflect on these, then we can actually say, I'm a Buddhist practitioner, I'm a Buddhist. So it's only those 4 things. Of course, we can elaborate much more on various points to reflect upon. But to summarize, really, it all comes down to really just those 4 things, those 4 reflections. And so now we've mentioned the refuge and the motivation of bodhicitta. And I think that you probably have a good understanding of this, and that's very clear to you. I just mentioned it again because it's so important and just as a reminder. Because no matter how we think about it, refuge and the motivation of bodhicitta are really very important. And because they are so important, they precede any Dharma practice that we may engage in. For example, when we practice, we do any puja, any practice, we always first recite refuge and bodhicitta. And not only do we recite it always, we recite it 3 times because of its importance. And so that is why I also mentioned it again as a reminder, because it is so important. That is why we always recite it over and over again. And if we bring that to mind, we can really understand its importance. And if we understand that, then our practice will be of greater benefit. Yes.
제거리 손으로 봤대 제대로 편도 시험도 왔대 전송으로 대 대화 치모래야 다 생시 그분도 와 생시에 야와라 생시에다가 달리 장로노 이진이에요 대소소지 총도 모두 땅으로 와 대리전 다 소소소소지 소소 농바래 진이 모든 두개 아니 장로 간데 생시 대 제대 야본 두개 내가 라니 나 농바래 두개 나 대화치 뭐 렌 두개 소소소 지 준주로 다제잖아 아니 야보야 고소 근데 따거래스 때나마 아드샤 손 고소 예시망어 롱신 따와스 아드샤 가서 나는 som만 레 도모와서 엄마 연발 깨야 코치 야를 많이 뭐 시야야 됐어 대 제와 제고 말했어 대파 요스 대 소소 라니 소소 가르치는 소소 링와 요소 가르치는 제와 제네 아니 그러와 링와 요소 개외 쇼는도 뭐 개외 쇼는도 들이야보다 아니지 이네 다 당게세 뭐지 라니 내 대화 치모래도게 라니 농바래도게 소소소라니 또 답지 신주의자 대다 개체모래 맞아 대 소소가 야보 야와 이jawa 친 대파 야는 뭐 연반은 때는 야도 뭐 뭐시에 되나 근데 야보 야 말에 세워다 조지나도 la ja ke chamo soya da do se da se ya.
So again, if now I've given an introduction to that, and also the past Kadamba masters have said again, if one wants to practice the Mahayana, it's not enough to just speak about it. We also have to actually do it. We have to practice the Mahayana, and only then do we become a Mahayana practitioner. So these words of advice are really excellent, actually. They really are very beneficial to us. And so in order to become a Mahayana practitioner, the cause that we need is bodhicitta. And in order to have refuge, we need those two causes that we just mentioned. And you should really see for yourself whether or not you possess these causes. So really ask yourself, am I a real Buddhist or not? Do I possess these two causes in order to possess refuge? Do I possess a mind of bodhicitta? Do I have the cause of bodhicitta? Am I a real Buddhist? Am I a real Mahayana practitioner? It's something that we should really ask ourselves. Matisha also said that don't look at the faults of others, but look at your own. Often as beginning practitioners, we tend to project outward and look at what other people are doing. And when we look at what they're doing, then we find a lot of negative things to speak about. And we can speak about their faults extensively. So Atisha said, don't look at that. Don't be bothered with that. Look at what am I doing? What am I actually doing? What am I doing with my body, speech, and mind? Am I practicing virtue? Am I being non-virtuous with my body, speech, and mind? Am I really a Mahayana practitioner? Am I really a Buddhist practitioner? It's very important to really analyze yourself, examine yourself in such a way. So don't be so much bothered with what other people do and speak about their faults and so on, but rather really look at yourself. What am I actually doing? So these words of advice are also very important to us. So these were all really our preliminary instructions. So what we are actually talking about today are the 8 verses of mind transformation. And this is an extremely important teaching. It's also very short. There's not much. It's just 8 verses, but they are very important to us. And they are simple instructions that are easy to practice and really have tremendous and great benefit to our practice. So that is really what we are talking about today. And it would be actually, I would recommend that you memorize these 8 verses so that you don't need to look at a text and read them from a text. If you memorize them and then recite them in your mind from memory, then that will really have a power to bring about a transformation in your mind. So therefore, this is very beneficial.
Chilukarina, Genchude, no, Jando, Jai Genchude, on Tom, Lava Salon Tongrova, Genchude. And the Telly Mamma, Senchia said, Deatema, oh, that's Zachim Zamarova, or Teniche, anybody, Cheva, Chemo Chegrova. Or the Red, Tanda Loyum Tidiama, the Manoloyum, Condolo, Garrison Garrison, or your Jai Sangye. 根据的大气模哈俩的是，俺那点以先前等着，农家用的先前当做厂嘛，哈俩家里全部的是，家里钱咱俺做么呢？么现在那个的，是吧？对吧？啥样怎样？要多少？这样厂嘛，以前先前的等用不用啊？俺那点的就干弄起来去呢，多样了，上级就公布套法了哟。 那原先些的店里套个嘛，都原先些嘛，那上级公布套头嘛的话是。等那一次，他一个家里要上街多，么个申请人我等俺说，我那时候要不一动了，搞得去要讲俺去，几把圈儿的是。我等的重要的话，我等那一阵的，原来下路用过那种那些，那种别说全部多，我呢要不要的是呀？
And so the great, the benefit, the special benefit of those 8 verses of mind training is really that it applies to really anyone, any Dharma practitioner, whether we are a beginning Dharma practitioner or really anyone from any tradition. We all reflect on that really, and it begins with first. Refuge and the mind generation. And so these are considered really the most important practices. And then between those practices and the rest of the practices, there's actually a big space. So what's most important above all other practices is that the refuge and bodhicitta, and that's really the essence of the mind training. And so through mind training, we recognize the kindness of the 3 jewels, and then through the mind generation, we also recognize the kindness of all sentient beings. So they're actually equally kind to us. The Buddhas and all sentient beings are equally kind to us. Sentient beings are also very kind to us because any happiness that we may find in this life, any temporary happiness, comes from sentient beings. For example, the food that we eat, the places that we stay, any kind of happiness that we may find, all comes from others. And even to attain enlightenment, in order to attain enlightenment, we also need sentient beings. Without sentient beings, we actually cannot attain enlightenment. So if we think about Buddhas and sentient beings both, they are actually both very kind to us. So we can say there's like 50-50%. They're equally kind, in other words. And so the special benefit that comes from the mind training is really to recognize this.
쇼로가 방법에 정도 인진 거만 연도 진행해서 당간도 되게 상만 먹을写那 디세 문제가 어때네 정도 쇼로가 방법에 연도 많이 내셔 근데 자외치 그런 노지나도 많이 되시잖아 아니 내가 와야 돼서야
And so now we come to verse number 1. So please first recite verse number 1 together in English. So we won't have time to go through the entire book, but once you have recited that first verse together, then we will go a little bit into explaining the root verses. But first, please recite verse number 1 together.
I am with an intention to fulfill the supreme wishes of all sentient beings that is more valuable than wishes granting jewel. May I always cherish and love them all.
Okay. 我这里当地学了个广播的个，当时神仙同学已经弄， 连就这个什么道的基本这么学噻。我在他可能已经我连查了吧，可能老远要回去过，要不过要的上边。但是呢，你想那个港工的，早搞的单个，现在你大工些那想想的，你看你不，各种想带到想我早打的，你说那个港工的个，你想我你看你我得做单边啥的啊。
So now you have recited this first verse together in English, and since you're well educated, you probably understand the meaning of this verse. And so, in brief, what does this verse teach? It teaches the two kinds of bodhicitta. There is the relative bodhicitta and the ultimate bodhicitta. So, verse number 1 teaches the two kinds of bodhicitta.
근데 다음에 뭐좀 다음 생체 탐체라 생도가 어때서 다음 생체 탐체라 세 다세야 되나세요 다 다세야 돼 간데도 소소 노지 제진 나 다세야 돼 주민서 하고 지하데 개침모레스 그러나 아니 되게 재밌다 이건도 다 개침모 맞는 요요는 되게 말이야 다세야 돼 다음 생체 탐체 다세야 수래 간간도 다 nensi de shiwajiya de kechimoyo yes.
So then the verse begins with I am, with the intention to fulfill the supreme wishes of all sentient beings. So the first verse here is I am. So first of all, that's important to understand. What is that actually? Who is that I? What is that I here? It's important to understand the nature of this I. We can't just neglect that and ignore this term I even. And we have to really understand who is that really and what is the nature of it.
아니 네가 다 당근에 너세 이데야 다 너가세 다 먼저 좀 세도 세 시대 용화는 아니 매제지하고 세어 뭐야 시대야는 아니 소소 대화야 이 동종 세대 시대면은 아니 눈에 용돼요 어때 간도 세노 동거 세 시대면은 눈에 용도 세 시대 매화데 수치하고도 소나다 컨트롤하서 많이 영어도 제거하러 tenendo noji nensity shiwachiya de kechomores ya.
So this we all have this mind, and in our minds, what we need to cultivate is a state of peace and happiness. If our mind is peaceful, then we will feel happy. But if our mind is not peaceful, if our mind is negative, we will experience suffering. So really think about this. If our mind is in a good state, we will be happy. And if our mind is in a state of not being peaceful, then we are unhappy, because then we are controlled by the afflictive emotions. So all the unhappiness and state of feeling not at peace is created by the negative emotions of hatred and anger and so forth. And it's important to recognize this.
Dunge tsama bi nonsai go na dunge tsawa na o ta dan ma dan zhen de da song ko so o dunge tsama tsawa de da o dan de dan zhen di che ge yo ai o de ni song a ris da ji sha de ji sen se ro o de ni song a de ni za ta ta ni da se ni mo song de ba o ti de da ne lu de shi wa che a de da o ke che mo yo re se ya.
And now, according to the Buddhist teachings, the Buddha says that the root of all suffering is self-grasping. It is the demon within our own mind. So therefore, it's really important to understand the nature of this self. So the next, it says all sentient beings. So the order is a bit different in the Tibetan. So all sentient beings, as you mentioned before, all sentient beings are very kind to us. And as you mentioned, Lord Atisha said that sentient beings are incredibly kind to us. They indeed are the very source of all of our temporary and ultimate happiness. And for this reason, they are more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel. So that is more valuable than a wish-granting jewel. So that is because any true temporary and ultimate happiness is accomplished through the kindness of sentient beings. So. So if we practice the authentic Dharma, ultimately it leads to the attainment of enlightenment. And so in order to attain the state of enlightenment, we need a proper foundation of Dharma practice. And it all comes down to the motivation, the mind of bodhicitta. And that mind of bodhicitta regards all sentient beings as most precious, more than a wish-fulfilling jewel. And because the bodhisattvas of the past have seen sentient beings in such a way, they have become as excellent as they are now. So if we also want to reach such excellence, we must practice the way they did. So that was verse number 1, and now we come to verse number 2. So again, please recite verse number 2 together in English, and then we will go into the verse.
When I am with anyone, I see myself lowest among all, and from the very depth of my heart, may I cherish others as superior.
哦，原来上么淘宝求的基本怎么学些，但上么弄到钱，或者给你钱元了，啊你也不要教育的是，对面那个按照的话，没少用到这个少少罗用的话也呢，俺姐去了的话，那俺姐去那个哦，你帮忙没少个的话，我带人那也看到现在要讲的个要，讲的个桥啊，大一桥了个当没得呢，那神仙通街了，已经弄的了。那些家咋的吧？我现在等着了，说呢，你也上点儿能用着着呢，你先把这要空的给点了，那说说你要不要的谁呀
So whoever I'm with, when I'm with anyone, I see myself lowest among them all. So I raise others higher, and I make myself lower. And from the depth of my heart, so really with a sincere intention. So for some people, they maybe more pretend to raise others and take the lower seat, but it doesn't really come from deep within. They're not really sincere about it. So it should be 100% completely, not just saying it, but really feeling it sincerely inside, sincerely taking the lower seat and raising others up. Otherwise, if we don't do that genuinely, and we practice the mind training, we might take pride in our training. And if we have pride, we will again accumulate a lot of negative karma. And so also verse number 1 necessarily leads to verse number 2. They're connected. So because in verse number 1, we have already learned that sentient beings are more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel. And therefore, because they are so precious, I will cherish others as superior.
我对这俺这来东么说他，哦，说说老用的我懂他，别用的我对这呢，说说俺说俺姐去个了，你这弄那个要修音天天的，我等到弄这些，是吧？人工的，搿得也不都都不都，通过的毛我啥的，过几几的单呢，来了单呢，那就是说呢，第几几的配置单个的嘛，这几几马单把当不嘞，那也不啥意。要嘛，可那个点的，现在个，哦，也不能，就不能，通过毛噻的，既当的个，那个当的的毛问，那个当的就通过噻，哦，可以，我点呢，罗个的嘛都的，嘛点把个，我只用需要嘛的噻啊。
So often beginning practitioners, they feel that I'm very learned, I have education, or I have some money, and then they take a lot of pride in that, and they feel that I'm the one, and they're very prideful, and they think I'm the best. And so that way of thinking is really mistaken, because we often speak about good and bad and high and low and so on, but there is actually no high and low, no good and bad that exists self-sufficiently on its own without anything that it relates to. So it's, in other words, relative. One thing is better than another in relation to something else. So things are interdependent, interconnected. There is no inherently good thing that is just higher or higher than anything else without anything in comparison. So only relative to something else we can say something is higher, but nothing is high in its own, like self-sufficiently high, on its own accord.
我在这里俺说来东么话说买啥的我嘛，听说来个啥的来东么话是晓得，我搞我也就买的地。你呢？俺说的，东么东么，熊就的3年来前没钱没钱呢，得大的时候让你买啥种呢？那要求的，得看送钱不要的，是吧？送农家钱不少的吧？我听这的，我都是这样。
And so as a beginning practitioner, when we are being told that we should take the lower seat, we should be the lowest among all, and perhaps we don't really like to take the lower seat, but if we interested in cultivating a mind of bodhicitta, a good intention, then it is best to always take a lower seat. It is really to our own greatest advantage. We accumulate a great amount of merit. So now let's move on to verse number 3. So having awareness of my mind in every action as soon as delusion and affliction arises, and begin to harm myself and others, may I strongly confront and stop them immediately. So again, please recite verse number 3 together first in English.
Having awareness of my mind in every action, as soon as delusion and affliction arises, and begin to harm myself and others, may I strongly confront and stop them immediately.
Okay. 对不起，我当年在这个上，先让更多逻辑的大几年我先把到，当然老师干电影那的话，说，我另外有什么干的结构度也不会大，俺那也不结构度呢，俺那说解释我去电脑一切，俺那电脑正常我结构度呢大几，那边的控制着我用这个钱用的，那也不没上面，俺那大家用过，你没电的吧？ 没把结果的是，我都说的吧，我得了呀啊。
So what this verse teaches is that, so having awareness of my mind in every action as soon as delusion and affliction arises. So at all times, we should always look at our own body, speech, and mind. What am I doing with body, speech, and mind? And if you find that you are doing good with body, speech, and mind, then rejoice in that. And if you find that you made a mistake with body, speech, and mind, for example, if anger is about to arise, then immediately recognize that and think that that's not good, and immediately apply the antidote and eliminate the afflictive emotion.
我先让跟着让几个大姐才能做这个领导，看了结果都大姐写的，当然就变了。连他我写的公众的我等到，那连他我来个的是，好，是吧？大姐写的，感谢呢连他我来个的是，那你嘛希望毛包公众的毛包刚的啊，那你刚没用的来个，或连他我写，是吧？俺这个呀，老用100人呢，老用钱写么多，公众的俺这公众写老用这个么多个，个让一个几来么多个，我得刚没用的意思。等于这他先让明白等到他真的简单的没把钱，第一种学但想把你也都让我学的了，没挣钱了，你忙吧，得光的钱光没用，我得学钱吧，来个的话，但那俺做工作学钱。 让一来个容易，你想在这种进来以后的事，等于这到这些呢，这些呢也不要来这样。
And so we should always examine our own mind. What am I doing with body, speech, and mind? And for example, when anger arises actually quite easily. Why does it arise so easily? It's because we have habituated to being angry over and over again in many lifetimes. So it has become like second nature to us. Whatever we habituate to becomes very easy, arises just on its own. And for example, if we want to learn something new, we don't just immediately know that. But for anger, we don't really need to learn to be angry. It just comes naturally. It comes on its own without us having to make any effort, not like learning something else. And that's because we have habituated ourselves to it for so long, for so many lifetimes. But this habit can also be reversed. So if we counter it with habituating our mind instead to reflecting on love and compassion, then we are going to habituate to this state of mind. And in the future, a very strong sense of love and compassion will arise within us. So right now, our anger is very powerful because of our habit. But if we make an effort in reversing that by cultivating love and compassion, it will also become a strong habit. And so that is why we should reflect and always examine our state of mind. And then we move on to verse number 4. So again, we read that together. When I see the difficult people controlled by their negativity and suffering, they are rare to find like a jewel treasure. May I preciously cherish them. So that's also an excellent verse. So please again recite this verse together.
When I see the difficult people controlled by their negativity and suffering, they are rare to find like a jewel treasure. May I preciously cherish them.
So in the Mahayana teachings say that we have to cultivate love and compassion for all sentient beings. And so this concept of love and compassion for all beings seems to be something that we can easily grasp. But then sometimes when we see somebody who is very negative, a really difficult person, with a very kind of rough personality, then it's quite difficult to cultivate love for them. Then we think that he's just so bad, he's just so negative. It's really hard to love that person. But if one is someone who trains in cultivating bodhicitta, it's actually very important to regard such a negative person, a difficult person, with an even greater love and compassion. And then we come to verse number 5. When others, out of jealousy, treat me wrongly with insulting words, I take the defeat upon myself, and may I offer the victory to others. So again, please recite this verse together. If you read it together, you will get a clear understanding of these words.
When others, out of jealousy, treat me wrongly with insulting words, I take the defeat upon myself, and may I offer the victory to others.
Ane sosu ta yangju sendo ni nyone sheme yinbe chane ane sosu juna wote ka kanon kesona wote te yana ane yasho ares no? Yitong le tongbo wan taga se yido te jia gale kawo yawa wa. O tene yin zang nangdi, da tewa chi mi chi nyuan le xie mi yin bei cha ne, da kono gale nangdi de ko ten gale jia na, so su jung na wo de ke, kono kono ke song na wo de jia yo na, de ga wo de se wa.
So there are some individuals who treat us wrongly, and they are very unkind to us. They say many harsh things. They insult us with words, and often they might even physically abuse us or hit us and so on. And of course, that could be quite defeating. But if one is a practitioner wanting to cultivate bodhicitta, it is always best to offer the victory to them. And of course, for a beginning practitioner to practice that is a little bit difficult. But since we are practitioners of the Mahayana, no matter how badly, how wrong we feel treated by others, no matter how negative, no matter how unkind they treat us, we should always take any defeat upon ourselves and offer the victory to them. Thanks.
Okay, so yeah. That man was sure to body they should do. No, gonna dog paint on the watch. 现的没那些难用，今年他们大不修，这把的进来了噻，那可能已经我进来说的，把些高这温度啊，我这也不了的这样。
And then next we move on to verse number 6. When someone whom I have helped and in whom I have had great hopes, if they harm me in extremely negative ways, may I see that person as my spiritual friend. So again, please recite this verse together in English, so you'll clearly understand. The words are very clear.
When someone whom I have helped and in whom I have had great hopes, if they harm me in extremely negative ways, may I see that person as my spiritual friend.
Okay. All the guys and someone is in another one of the machine. Machine, Yambaja, Ropa Yabu Chena, Alia, Carigoni, Ropa Yabu Chena. Yeah, then the Chede, on a Mune Chena, Matic Sula, Sosola, Tenoji, Ropa Yabu Chena. Rate or take, Ropa Payabu, Mobo Chena, Tuti, Land, Ropa Yabu, Machiachi, and the Donsho. Oh, Sosonka. Never Chiavado. What did he? Momo younger was. What I tell you, Shuna Shepona, they are home Mariwata. Rate on Andotande, Chinole, Yabu, Shemi, Bichan, or that is the Pagwaneta, Shinya Tomba, Shen Marie, Nation, Shinya Tomba Tower show Senduva, Shen Maruing. Oh, Teligo, the job too, land the job, dress on, Shini, so on the same one too, that they got, Yone Chiago, the Bagwan, Oka Jaguar, that's the Benin, the Benin, the dollar ten young so. The Bagwan, Coca, the control on Yaji, a Shena, the Bagwan Vermonza, as young we are whatever, or the listen on Tom Grace,
So when someone when you help someone, when you are kind to someone and you help them, then normally what you would expect in return is that they appreciate your support and that eventually they also kind to you. So that it in some ways comes back to you. So that is how things should be. If you're kind to someone, then they should appreciate that kindness. But often it's not the case. Often other people do not appreciate our kindness, and in fact, they even harm us when we try to help them. And of course, generally speaking, we can say that this is not very good. This is not how one should be. However, if one is a true Dharma practitioner, one would actually regard such a person as a spiritual friend. one would be patient with them and to think that it is okay. And I will not retaliate, I will not fight back, that will only disturb my mind. This person is actually giving me an opportunity to practice patience. And we need to practice patience. And it's only through these kind of people that we are able to practice patience. It is those people who trigger our anger that allow us to practice patience. If we wouldn't have such people to trigger us, then we also would have no opportunity to practice patience. So.
Tende mewa chia sona te tande so lama noji tane ko zeba gon tende chia tsares.
Then here's the question. Bring to mind someone whom you have helped in the past, either now or in the past. Someone that you've been very kind to, someone that you helped. But then in return, they insulted you and they actually hurt you in return. So now, thinking about this person, would you be able to see that person with great patience like your guru, like your lama?
Okay. That's all of the Martin and San Donna Miss or Gibbon. No, Penny Man or Colony. My near Sonny Dollar never show. Or shall look at the mud in yonder chin there. And this all no what thing on the noji gum jelly. Tony gum say Chishegro. Oh, Tony Yonachia gum shegro. What they? And they shall look at the muddy and yes, I is here.
And then we come to verse number 7. In brief, both directly and indirectly, I offer my happiness to all mother beings, all harms and sufferings to all mother beings. May I secretly take upon myself. This verse mainly refers to the practice of Donglen, of giving away on happiness and taking on the suffering of others. So this is the teaching in verse number 7.
Donde ane rangi ji ta dewa do gewa so ya do deshi no gewa so ya gong ya wa te ane ji no ga ni senji yin ba no na ne senji yin ba pa yin ba ma so dong ge so so no dong ane wo te do che chung wa te chang ane senji yin be ji ta do nge mo go ya ro o ni ji na sa senji do dong do choma so ji ji zu len so so len ne rangi ta o Danzes, Danzen, big wall, to Langi, Sunday, Lambego, or Tenny Mi Pachon, or Tenny Chena, that only said the Guantana Wote, and that the ocean or two scenes are yes,
I forgot to mention, please recite this verse together before. And so now the way we should reflect on this verse is that when you are exhaling the air, and you think that I'm sending out all my happiness and all my virtues, all my goodness to sentient beings, and may it eliminate all their suffering. And then when you're inhaling the air back in, think that I am inhaling, taking in all the suffering of sentient beings. I'm taking in all their physical illnesses, their mental suffering, and so on. I take it all upon this self-grasping. And by taking it on to my self-grasping, it becomes purified. So this is how we basically practice Donglen. So.
Oh, the nation, that the legal Tana, only me party, or Chen, one miss that Jalo Lucia Pai, he jagger to party soon or 10 or you to you my Mario was. Your Mari did that they would only to say, mi pa te kong long tu ke ne dong le ko so no dong de na ma de le che ne na ngo shu chi ne so no ja che mo sa de wa ane so no so la pen de wa ane ni sha tu che so no mo mo dong de na ane yin ba dong te ya ta ko ni ba na wo che ro ta na ngo ja lo chu chu yu ma yin ba dong an de ka le ya ro wa de ni dong le ko de mo mo lo yong de na ane yin ba chu che mo dong te ni 아니 근데 기 강선은 근데 다니 랑 리우 이바 동태니 리지마 동니마 로지시아야로 어떤도 동보 뭐는 중상으로 동네 거 소노 동네야 레서면서 동모래 리지마 동위세는 이바 동거 조례네 리지마 동태니지 좋아요 말다 도시에니까 로 용다 되네 어느 야도로 어떤지 전도 그래서야
So, when we speak about giving away our happiness or taking on suffering, it's not like giving away a material thing. So it's not like we go and give something, but it's a motivation. It's a state of mind that we reflect on. And if you reflect in this way, you accumulate a great amount of merit. And also, if you reflect on this repeatedly, then through this habit, you are actually developing a power in your mind, a power of practicing generosity. For example, right now, if you have a really nice thing, something that we really like, then it's a little bit difficult for us to just give that away to somebody. And so it's something that we have to train in. We train the mind gradually by practicing Donglen, and then eventually by practicing this wish to give away, eventually we will be able to give something more dear to us away. And then if you habituate to even that, then eventually there are many stories of great beings who were able to even give away their own physical bodies. But they all started out small. They all started with the simple reflection of Donglen, and then they trained their mind repeatedly in that. It's not the case that those great beings began right from the start by giving away their body. So this is not how they began. They also gradually worked themselves up through mind training. And this is how we have to practice.
Okay, good.
And then we move on to verse number 8, the last verse. All these spiritual practices undefiled by the eight world systems, understanding of all things as illusion, may I be liberated from bondage without clinging. So read this together. By reading it, you will also gain a good understanding.
All these spiritual practices, undefiled by the eight worldly stains, with an understanding of all things as illusion, may I be liberated from bondage without clinging.
Okay, that's short. That's the land on morning. That is what the damage. The dog can do cheese, don't be to know. Oh, man. She said, that the tombo, land tombo, then you got it. Soon I said, that another going to share the Daniel chair, but Momo is so on. What the little chin can reach cherry and I own, and that don't so much. 你在期间都忙着吧，一些过的是，喏，哦，你在期间都在上呢，等你技能到瞧不了嘛是，大就你空的些别人来写啊带动，都从嘛，逻辑开始，说是技能来干的写呢，那你在期间忙着吧，结果的是喏，那当不你的我都说了的是。
And so in this verse, it says all these spiritual practices undefiled by 8 worldly stains. So before we mentioned various Dharma practices, and this verse is particularly addressed to beginning practitioners. So in the beginning, whatever Dharma we practice, we must be careful that our practice never becomes defiled by the 8 worldly concerns. Because if our practice becomes tainted by those 8 worldly concerns, then our practice will actually no longer be a true Dharma practice.
아니 가시 임바 때문에 뭐뭐 땅도 임바 땅한테 야보레 임바 땅나 남의 임베 그 임바 땅이 미 야보레 소소 미 야보로 이도 깨도 전부 나오고 저거리 근데 그 그러면은 아니 된지대 지제를 넣어가리 대체나 네 나고 임 펜도 자치모 야마리 서 띵원도 먼저 와 그거리 세다 나 되고시나 내 동보 되니 와 두스면이 세야
So to put it in simple terms, how does our practice become defiled by the 8 worldly stains? So for example, if you think that I'm practicing bodhicitta, so I'm going to make it clear, everyone knows I practice bodhicitta. Because if other people know that I practice bodhicitta, they will think that I'm so great. I'm such a great practitioner. Or I'm going to be very generous to others, because if I am very generous to others, then other people will think that, oh, she's a really good person. So it will really help my reputation, my fame, if I am good to others. So if you have any such a motivation, then your practice has become defiled by the 8 worldly stains, and therefore it is no longer very beneficial actually. So it's important to never become controlled in your practice by these 8 worldly stains. So this is really an address to beginning practitioners.
단지 군에 개침모 저거 어서 단지 가르세 가 공대시야 노이 단지 지동의 랑이 맞아 땡겨 데 단지 가르시에서 지금 지마 시베로 신변 치마래 도쇼 바이 쇼로가 담모 노텔라 돈 생체 탐제라 세와 도아티 다기 나니 뭐 시바치아 개침모 세임바 대노이 단단비고 지금 지마시벨에 신변 치마래 도쇼세 공대 시베 다세야만도 당나 세요라 와스 나세와디 가와미 풍비 나로 풍봉가요로 나세 나도 풍봉가 풍보 세프게라 요아리잖아 대 요아마리스 예 풍부 세디 요아마리 디노 풍보 예사테라 아니 나세야디 요아리스 레토다 예사테네 나티 간제 인도선 풍보 예사테네 나디 요아리 나티 간제 인도선 만도 짜나 아니 니에게 요아마리스 자네 마디에나는 다 원한다 나세야디 도세야디 요아마리 와세나 요아리스 도스타 디네한테 단단히 쇼 지니 파티가 되는 거야.
And then the last 2 lines, with an understanding of all things as illusion, may I be liberated from bondage without clinging. So this verse here, this last verse is actually very important, and it really links back to the very first verse that we mentioned before. So before we also mentioned that, so what this verse, first of all, is teaching is that all phenomena lack any inherent existence. And so in the verse number 1, it started out with this I am. And we mentioned before that it's very important that we recognize, we identify what is this I actually, this I who considers all beings as so precious. And so this I, as it mentions, here in the last verse, we understand all things as illusion. May this I become liberated from bondage without clinging. So this I that we mentioned in verse number 1 does actually not exist. That is what is established here. Because if we really examine it, where really is that I? Who is that? So we call it the collection of our 5 aggregates as the I. That's me. So we think that it's those 5 aggregates. But we can't say it's the 5 aggregates because the 5 aggregates are a heap of things. So the I, however, is found within those aggregates. And so if you try to find the I in those aggregates, however, you can't find it. If you try to look for that I that you think are those aggregates, then it's nowhere there. And then you might say, okay, then the I does not exist. But that is also not the case because there is I am. So this is the concluding verse, which is very important. So we all think of ourselves, this I, as most important, very precious. But all it really is it's just a label or like an imputation that we fabricate on the basis of our 5 aggregates. So we call the 5 aggregates the I, but then even the 5 aggregates themselves are empty of self-nature. So they do also not inherently exist.
Okay. Raji Jabi. Said that Shabo was or Tennessee, Tanga said, can do rules of a month, some of on a way. No, Nasia. Sana, don't hear Mari, can't dare is it. The money and I can't make a woman do it. I think so. No, you have on no, you take what on a month at on a pepin to Chimoyas.
So it's very helpful to our practice to really understand this I and to think about it in terms of how it is explained according to the Buddha Dharma, the Buddha's teachings. So in the teachings, we are encouraged to try find it, look for it, and then if we try to find it, we cannot find it. But even though we can't find it, it's still not non-existent. So this reflection is really very beneficial to our practice.
Well, today is the Tanamando or Pombola, Papa, they say Tanamando de Geshe Sangye Choloka Jewati, and Tandano Tati, Lenny, Tando Shimba. They share the zone or Tango, no man, Oma Padua, Oma Bill, Oma Tanjo, Mantanjo said they would do it, but the Dawado or Jan or Tandakiti or Tango Shawado. What are consolute? Sometimes here they are this,
And so the so-called I is nothing but an imputation that we fabricate on the basis of the 5 aggregates. So that is what this verse is ultimately teaching us. And so this view, really actually what this mainly reflects is the view of the Madhyamaka, the Prasangika Madhyamaka according to Chandrakirti and Shantideva and so on. So this is the view that is reflected here in this verse.
What in this sonata, Kondoya, that is so I didn't want it, touching. Yeah, Nancy, that there, Guachamo Yapo, you do some sense you can do my tatemi senato devo mandu te, Kale Kawondu, Jangu, Jangu, Sen Kondo Chijit.
So when you think about all this, like what really the question is, what arises in your mind? Do you feel this is really great? I really understand that makes complete sense, or do you maybe feel more like when I hear that it makes me feel a bit uncomfortable, or that sounds very difficult? So how do you feel about it?
Okay. The Nanzo Tanyu. Chikano, make Papa Tony, Mando Korong in the Choyo Mari Larva. Me, Kono, Mando me, Karina, de Papa, Korong in the Chobayomani Larva. De Nando do Sonotone, let I will do. Nando Dinuma, Tama. Mando Soso me Mandawa Yarawa. Me Mandawate, and Soso Pamado Lamang to give me the part, Mando, Cotombo Chegane, oh. Tensen Munduga, Rangi to John Munduga. You know, meeting on the Patora, and top of Tony Mato, or Karangin to Chaba Munduga, or to say that some people, huh?
And so one way to reflect on that, that really all things, all phenomena are only labels that we fabricate or imputate, is that, for example, when we think about somebody's name, nothing, a name or anything else, nothing possesses an existence from its own side, on its own accord. So, for example, there are different kinds of people here, and they all have a name. We all have a name. And that is given to us by our parents. It's not that like we are born with that name, that we already had that we already were that to begin with. So that does not exist. It's an imputation, something that we fabricated. Somebody gave it to us. And so think of it in this way.
Trashi se Majana, Cochino, the Trashi Redena, Corangi Joro, the Conjuan Toyama, Tomon Tero, and Joaton Mary, Cotamon Tetra. Joaton Mary. The names are telling also Tomon called Rongi to one Terradiana, and then Joaton Yamari. Tanando Tawa Toa, the Sanji Kumbo Toa, he said, Yamari, Rangi Tomon, Jodiero, Topa Tomareva, Rangi Jodo. Rangi Jodo, Talarong, then you can Joat Maduga. The Joat Mawa, the Mario, Karina Duga. What the Rangi Maduba, in some take on Joat on head is,
So everything is an imputation and does not inherently exist. For example, if you have a person whose name is Tashi, Tashi is obviously a name that is given to him. But if it would not be that, if it would not be a mere imputation, a mere fabricated label, then he would be Tashi since he was born. So the moment he's born, he's already Tashi. And if that would be the case, then nothing could change that. He would always be Tashi because he's always been that. So there's no way that he could be anything else but Tashi. But that is not the case. He was not first that. He was given that name. If something would exist on its own without anything else, then it could not change. Then in that case, if that would be the nature of things, then there would be no liberation, there would be no enlightenment, no Dharma practice that leads to anywhere, because everything is how it is to begin with. It's all, there's no imputations, everything truly exists. If that would be the case, then everything would always stay the same as it is and could never be anything else, could never transform. But that's not the case. That's not how things really are. Things can transform. We can change and transform because we do not inherently exist.
Oh, there's a thing. Tango, Tango, Garla, Nasea, Soma Nasea, Pumbo, Kawadu Tan, wrong man, young man. Maniana, Yedu Yawa Jajatom, Yoris, Karshan Yos, and Laldo, Nandoi, Nadevi, Segdua, Nachibodu, Shibomandu, Segdua. The Yawa the Silva. Yori the Tate, or Kawan, there is an another wrong do it, so. Combo, one of my Jubati, Natica, really cheated, Yamari. Yamari. Maniana, Yedu, the Osivoro, what to say, no jing on the son of Madame, then the Nancy near Nancy to shot you at that, yeah, huh?
So if you think about it, we think that there is this me and I am these aggregates. But then if you actually look into it, where am I really? Where is this I in those aggregates? You can't find it. And even if you can't find it anywhere, it's still there. It still exists. And how does it exist? In you saying, I'm going, I'm sitting, I'm here, I'm happy, I'm unhappy. So there is an I, there exists such an I. But then again, where is that I, where is it? Again, you can't find it. It's nowhere to be found. You can look, try to find it, like dissecting your entire body from head to toe. You will not find it anywhere. And even though it's nowhere, it's still there. It still exists. So it's good to think about this kind of on an ongoing basis normally.
Well, the names are Nando let Tomola song, Garcia, Send Tomona, Send Tachimoche, and again, me, my, Send Tachimoche. They say, Shokashi, Chopashi, Chukashi, Lomashi, Chodonchi, and the Lang and Basso, and the Dume Legro. Or the leads are part on that legal, Sontalciana, Nasia, the Mini, Chossi Chiagaga, Topa Tony Mato. What? Rangi Jagmundo, Topa Tony, say, Delatin, Chodon Lotte, and Nipachun Doal, Pentola. They men and Cadina, Chodon Shuchim with Jagger. What do send that?
So this is addressed to us beginning practitioners. And in the beginning, we always, you first think about me, and then this is mine. And because of this, we have an attachment to one side and an aversion to the other side. And because of attachment and aversion, we create negative karma. And as a result of that, we experience suffering. So if we think about it in those previous terms, you realize that this I, this me, is just a fabrication. It does not really exist, inherently exist. And when you see that, this will actually naturally take away the power of these emotions of attachment and aversion. If you don't see that, then the emotions of attachment and aversion will always grow stronger. So now I introduced you to, kind of also reminded you of something that you actually already know, and that is that the refuge is the entrance gate to the Buddha Dharma, and therefore it's so important. And then also I introduced you to the root verses of the 8 verses of training and mindfulness. Mindful training, and I explained these in a simple way, very concisely. not elaborately by any means, but this has planted the seed of that in your mind, and now you just have to develop it from within. There are many commentaries on these 8 verses of mind training out there. Encourage you to read any of those commentaries, and in this way develop your mind training.
아니 치료 다방판에서 치료 인바리스 어때네 자때 만도 다네 요한도르네 르케치시에 로용 치지고 멜리시아데 아니 만도 처마 고가 야보리 소소네나데 가와즈모 야보 레티 선 예세론 제리에스 아니 정도 되노이 다 가디나 다 단기 공원 뭐뭐세야 노지 대체ሽ도 선보선보 이거는가 아니 선보선보예는 아니 가르치나 내가 다들 팬거리스 어떤지 제로지세요.
And all of you here, I've known you all from before. You're all old Dharma friends of mine. And today we have come together and we were able to speak about the 8 verses of mind training together. And really, this makes us all very fortunate that we were able to do that. And I personally really find great joy in that. I really rejoice in that fortune of being here with you. And also, you should too. And as you mentioned before, there's many things that we mentioned, but what's most important really is to have a good intention, a good mind, a good state of mind. If you have that, no matter what you do, this will always benefit you temporarily and ultimately. So please practice in this way.
Geshe patserila se koso te yedene ngando ane de nyanda dene ngande dise yabo mombo cheres chungha ko ro te ina ta geshe la mena chonanso te yeba noji ta ko chi shego tano ma ro jama che pa yabo rogu was te yabo te Trinley-Wangmo, ane maungba te moji te kale yari te, tes tega moji ba, yaboji ma, longwa ma se, te yaje tong yaboji noru chi se, tu se la jona.
So you all have really looked after the center for a long time. In the past, here in the Dharma Center, you've had Geshe sitting here, and when he was here, you did engage in many Dharma activities with him. So you all remember that. And now, even though he's not here physically, to you, you continue these activities as though he's still here, just like when he was still here. So I really am very happy to see how you continue on in this Dharma tradition without interruption. And of course, that is it could be difficult, but I'm also encourage you in the future to continue on in sustaining this excellent path that you are on right now. So.
소소 너무 여러 아니 소소 뭐지 내가 여러 어떤도 여러 내가 뭐 여러 이카 단디 치조 네 그런 로탄 뭐지 다 제진이가 동안도 다 뭐뭐 제로 어떤도 내가 뭐 여러 깔래 여러 생각도 하고 깔래 여러 때다 문에 깔래 때 여러 때 어떤도 깔래를 맞다와 친구만 뭐지 아니 야고 제로 지스로 깔래 때 제를 하고 Kale yena ta ko tendo level keson na wote na sama kom kora keson tanda to ko pesho ro ga do ya ma ri te ne ma on ba ta ne so san je ma ga wa ro ba ta jin yo san ji ji kom ta we ma ta ni ren do ani ro xie wa xie ma de ta ta ju ji me ji ma ta ni ta ya ko yi de na an te ke che mo ro wa te di se no tong ro ani nge ma ta Nando Sangye Thinley da Gong Xie no yi wa 조지 라마 아데샤 만화를 봐도 당도 치기 된다 가래 뭐뭐지 공도 야고 쳐와도 상지야데 아니 가래 뭐뭐잖네 로도 가래 뭐뭐잖네 레서는 가래 마잖네 다세 된지 쳐 말해봐 당도를 세는 동안 가래 되지야나요 된지 소로 지세야
And so all of you, you have families and you have work, you have a lot of work to do. And on top of that, you also look after the Dharma Center and you make sure that it is well maintained and looked after. And of course, that's a lot of work. And also, I know it's very difficult at times. But I ask you to try not to look too much at the hardship, but continue with your efforts as before. And think about the great results, the benefits that come from looking after the Dharma Center, sustaining the Dharma Center. Of course, there is no monetary benefit. You won't get rich from it, but in the future, you will not take birth in the 3 lower realms, and you will come closer to the state of enlightenment and liberation. And until then, in the future, you will take birth in the higher realms, such as a human being. And that is quite important. So please also think about that. And think about the great masters of the past, such as the Buddha himself, or Lord Atisha, Milarepa, and so on. How much hardships have they endured for the sake of the Dharma? And because they endured so many hardships, they attained enlightenment in the end. It's because they persevered through any difficulty year by year continuously. They did not reach such excellence just like for the heck of it, but without doing anything. That really required a lot of persistence and hardship. So now think about that as you continue to move forward in looking after the center.
Okay.
So then we stop the teachings here and do dedication, and the teachings were great. Geshe-la Travala. Oh, Ganden Choepel and see you next Sunday. Thank you.
Thank you, Ina. Kondu